So generally, thanks, Jen. So those of you, again, may know us in a number of different capacities, but as a community foundation, we have a mission to inspire philanthropy that strengthens the 34 cities and towns that make up Essex County. And we do that in really three big buckets of work. The first one is this idea around managing and investing charitable assets. So we have 275 funds, depending on the market, somewhere around $130 million of invested charitable assets. Those funds range from donor-advised funds, scholarship funds, all designed with specific purposes to help a donor achieve their ultimate needs. And then within that falls what we're talking about today, our nonprofit funds, and we'll certainly get into the nitty-gritty of that. The second piece is a bucket of work is strengthening and supporting nonprofits. So maybe many of you have received some discretionary grant making from funds that ECCF is in charge of, certainly recipients of funding from our donor advised funds and others, but perhaps you've also attended a workshop or a program that we've built really in an effort to understand that a strong community really starts with a strong nonprofit community, and how lucky we are in Essex County to have you. Many of you perhaps have attended our Institute for Trustees, or our IFT, and I'm happy to share, if you don't know already, that the registration for that event in 2023 is already open. One of my colleagues, Landy, is going to drop the link into the chat here. The big kickoff is on March 28th. We've got an amazing keynote speaker, and the IFT is all virtual. So there's, I think, 18 plus virtual workshops that run over a period of 6 weeks. And what's cool is that, just as you think about it, our nonprofit fund holders actually get to attend the IFT for free. That's part of our overarching services. So just another plug, if you haven't checked out the website, check out that link, and hopefully you can join us. It's really incredible. And then the third bucket of work, many of you also have perhaps been involved in partnering with us in our community leadership efforts. We really seek as a community foundation to be a leader in convening resources, cross-sector collaborations that address root causes of challenges that we're experiencing as a whole county. So maybe you've heard of our Advancing Digital Equity work or our Creative County Initiative. Those three buckets right there make up ECCF and how we achieve our mission. But today what we're here to talk about is actually like two of those big key competencies coming together, and with this concept of investing charitable funds combined with our mission and our commitment to strengthening nonprofits. Those two elements, those two key competencies within ECCF have equaled this thing today that we're talking about, nonprofit funds. So let's dive into what those actually really are. So a nonprofit fund, just from a definition perspective, is a charitable investment fund to support and sustain a nonprofit organization's medium to long-term operations and goals. And that medium and long-term connected with investment fund is actually really important to just stop and focus on quickly. So the assets that are ultimately invested by a nonprofit in a nonprofit fund should be thought of differently than, say, your organization's operating account from which you're pulling consistent monthly expenses. These assets that are invested in these funds are typically dedicated more towards the future, or have a specific need or opportunity connected to them. Again, we're going to dive into all of these things. But the benefit of having this investment fund for these long-term goals and connecting with ECCF is that really ultimately your nonprofit's assets are being invested professionally, and alongside that whole other chunk, if you will, that $130 million of charitable assets, that's what we do. We manage charitable assets. That's absolutely our core competency. And so your organization's assets are sort of benefiting from that kind of thinking and philosophy and mechanics within that investment strategy. You're also outsourcing investment management and administration. We hear from executive directors, from board members a lot, from organizations that say, I'm curious about how this could help my organization, but I don't have the board expertise and I don't have the expertise on my board, nor do I necessarily want a significant chunk of my board to be spending time on investment practices and policies and watching, a brokerage account, when really we need them to stay focused on what is happening at the organization in a different way. And that goes certainly for executive directors. Your plates and lists of to-do things are so long. And so you really get an opportunity to sort of outsource this key opportunity to really a trusted partner. And that brings us to the third point, which is that, we are a nonprofit existing in the same community for the same purpose that you do. And so we see this as one element of an opportunity to support you among other ways that the Community Foundation supports your work, as we talked about in the previous slide. So diving a little bit into the nitty gritty, again, we're going to just keep following down that funnel. We're going to talk about how a nonprofit fund actually works. And the first thing that I want you to just sort of zoom out and look at is just to recognize the cyclical nature of this chart that's explaining the details. So the first thing that's going to happen is that a nonprofit establishes a nonprofit fund at ECCF. It sits within it's called a component fund within our structure. That nonprofit fund takes its assets, money, contributions, and puts them into the nonprofit fund that they themselves have established. Those nonprofit funds, the funds in the assets in that nonprofit fund are then invested within ECCF's investment pools. And ideally, the idea is that those grow over time. They have the potential to grow over time. And then finally, you see that last piece of the circle is that grants or the distributions out of the nonprofit fund can only flow back into that nonprofit. So there is the cyclical nature of money coming out of the nonprofit into the fund, being invested, and then back into the nonprofit itself. So we're going to dive into sort of the nitty gritty here again, but the last point here, that the piece, go back one slide, Jen, sorry, just really quickly. So this piece around the grants at the end, grants flow out of the fund to the nonprofit. The number one question everybody always asks is, well, who decides? Who gets to decide when that money comes out? And the easy answer is you do. You and your board decide when the money comes out. It is a request to ECCF and we process that request. Now, when we switch slides here, there are two different subtypes within the nonprofit fund structure that really dictate how and when and how much that money can come out. So just to put a finer point on it. All right, Jen, you can go to the next one. Thank you. So we have these two subtypes, a reserve fund and an endowed fund, and they're both designed to achieve a specific set of goals that the nonprofit organization has set forth. So for example, we'll start with the reserve fund. Reserve funds are typically for organizations that have a set of rainy day assets or are designating, a set of assets for a project, a capital campaign, something specific that's going to be in the future. Historically, many nonprofits in the last, several years who have opened nonprofit funds with ECCF have found that, they might have a set of funds called a rainy day fund sitting in a CD at a bank somewhere. And historically, that hasn't really produced a very strong return. And then the thought is that having some exposure to the market, having this investment strategy could actually help achieve more from that, help that money work for them in a different way over a longer period of time. The key to understanding how a reserve fund functions is that you as the nonprofit can access the full balance of the fund at any time. Each nonprofit fund, when established, will determine what are called authorized representatives, people within the board who are allowed to request funds from these assets from these funds, and there's a system of checks and balances within that. But essentially, those authorized representatives request a transfer of assets or a grant out of the fund. We get that request, we process the check, and on it goes back to your organization. We don't take expenditure responsibility. In other words, we're not asking you, well, what do you need those funds for? Is this really a good idea? No, you are in charge of making sure or of deciding when that money can come out. And again, up to the full balance of the fund. The other piece, subtype of nonprofit fund is called an endowed fund. And those are, again, attached to a different set of goals that the organization has set aside. And this is really about making sure that assets are invested to provide a reliable source of income in perpetuity. And so with that goal, the way in which it functions, the endowment functions, is different than the reserve fund because it is meant to secure the principal balance of the fund, by offering a limited access to the actual assets in the fund for grant making. So typically organizations are looking for like a permanent source of like to scrape a little piece off every year to fund its operations, but that ultimately they want to maintain that principal balance so it can grow over time, and that percentage can sort of come off every year in a different way. We typically see nonprofit funds choose to have their annual distribution based on ECCF spending policy, which is a board, our board of directors sets that and reviews that. Right now, it is 4.5% of the average of the trailing 20 quarters. That can get technical and we can talk about that, but essentially that is a calculation that ECCF does for our endowed funds and then lets you all know what you have access to. In both cases, you are not mandated to access the assets in these funds on any kind of consistent basis. You might say, hey, we don't need it this year. Hey, we don't need it for several years. That's fine. It all remains sort of invested in that same space. So we'll have lots of time for questions, so write those down. But for now, I'm gonna hand it over to Jen.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get to the next slide. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about ECCF as your investment partner. And I want to really go back to what Stacy said at the beginning in terms of when we think about that page with the 3 core competencies of ECCF. And the first one on that page is managing and investing charitable assets. It's important to realize that we are only investing charitable funds. So we're looking to maintain the long-term, steady, stable growth of these funds for the future, right? To make sure that they are there to continue to give back to the community in the future. And so as your investment partner, we give you that investment expertise, but on a very nuanced level for charitable funds. So I like to make this difference. There's a difference between working with an investment partner that kind of does broad-based investment work and maybe has a little bit of charitable expertise versus ECCF is only managing charitable assets that are supposed to be sustained over the long term. So our risk appetite, right, the way we design our investment portfolios is going to be different just because that's all we do. That's our core competency. Stacy also talked about that outsourced fund management. We'll go into this in a little bit more detail as well, but that is a huge benefit because it frees up capacity of your staff and your board. And then mission alignment, you're partnering with a partner in the community, another nonprofit doing good work in the community. And we also have access to mission aligned investment portfolios, which we'll talk about as well. So ECCF's investment expertise. So we have a team of investment experts that we rely on to design our investment strategy. It is managed by the board. The board created an investment policy statement. And what we really try to do is target steady asset growth while managing risk and cost. I like to say, we're not stock pickers. We're not trying to, outperform the market by 5, 6, 7 times. We are just trying to maintain real purchasing power of the underlying assets, meaning that we want these assets to grow over time. That is the goal, but we're not going to put them at risk. And you'll see when I talk about the investment portfolios we have, how we've designed those. And so our investment strategy, it's managed to a board-approved investment policy statement, but it's managed on a regular basis by a subset of our board, which is our investment committee. And these are professionals with over 100 years of combined investment experience. So because of who we are in the community and what we do, we get access to these investment professionals on a volunteer basis. And we are passing that access and that knowledge on to you. And then the last point that I want to bring up here is because we are investing in such a large scale at over $100 million, we get leverage, economies of scale, and portfolio diversification that may not be available at a smaller investment level. So when you join as a nonprofit fund, you're getting access to our investment pools, which are going to get lower cost assets because we're buying in bulk, right? Lower investment fees, and a ability to access products in the market that may not be available at a smaller size. And so we had 2 main investment portfolios. So that 130-ish million of charitable assets is split between two portfolios. One is what we call the general fund, and this is your traditional balanced investment strategy. Here we also have a small percentage of private equity in this portfolio. Again, that type of product that you may not get access to on a smaller scale. But you can see that we have what we view as a conservative portfolio balance here in terms of 65% equities, 35% bonds. And boy, did I really not want to put the 3-year returns in on this slide, but I have to do it because I think the highlight here is, yeah, it's been rough to invest. Anyone in the market knows this. But I think the point here is that our investment committee is managing a strategy that is outperforming our benchmark by almost a full %, which is huge. And that's what they're out there trying to do, right? They're not trying to hit a home run out of the park. We're just trying to focus on beating that benchmark on a monthly basis and making sure that those assets are protected and growing steadily for the future. So that's our general fund. Our ESG fund is comprised of funds and managers who invest in companies that focus on these ESG principles. And you may have heard ESG, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. And so what that really is we are investing in investment products that focus on sustainable environmental principles, proactive social responsibility. So what you won't find in that portfolio are things like tobacco products, gun products, etc. So it's trying to be more mission aligned and trying to get a little bit more curated for that ESG focus. And that is also comprised of 65% equity, 35% bonds. And you can see it has a slightly lower return than the general fund over time, but it is still outperforming the benchmark. And we do hold the general fund and the ESG fund to the same benchmark. Again, plenty of time for questions when we get to the end. And I believe, I can't see the chat, but I believe Stacy just dropped in the link to our website, which you can find the details of these portfolios and how they're comprised. So the fund management, this is coming back to that outsourced fund management point that we've talked about. So not only are you able to kind of push aside the administrative burden of coming up with investment portfolio performance reports. There's a lot of auditing requirements that may need help with that we are here to be helpful for as your partner. But I think it's important here to talk about continuity because particularly at nonprofit boards, what we see is that there is turnover. And that, managing and investing in an investment portfolio for an endowment or a reserve, a rainy day fund, is something that takes a lot of skill, expertise, and knowledge. And as there is that turnover, whether it be on the board or potentially the executive level at the nonprofit, this is something that is very difficult to turn over for constant management. With ECCF, with a nonprofit fund at ECCF is that outsourced kind of CIO, right? Where we're managing and investing that investment program, that endowment, and thus the turnover can happen, but there's still continuity with the investment program. And then we also have our support for the organization overall. So from a program management perspective, a nonprofit fund comes with the monthly investment portfolio performance reports, 24/7 online access to fund information. And we are only a phone call away. You get a dedicated fund representative who will be able to help you with annual audit requirements, reporting needs, any questions you have. There's also complimentary registration to our annual Institute for Trustees. There's access to our ongoing capacity building and education opportunities. And then you work with us, a partner, to enhance your endowment fundraising strategy. So we can help you think through how to design an endowment, how to talk about it with your donor base, but also we can, in one-off situations, help facilitate, gifts of some complex assets that you may not be able to take on your own. So our fund management fees start at 75 basis points per year on funds under $1 million and reduce from there to 25 basis points per year on funds above $5 million. These management fees cover admin costs, access to our donor services support team, as well as that complimentary registration to the Institute for Trustees. We invite you to think about these fees as a reinvestment into the community, because you are partnering with a nonprofit. You're not partnering with a for-profit investment manager. So our admin fees, not only do they help do the work we do to facilitate the nonprofit fund and do all of that administrative work, but they cover our ECCF's community leadership efforts and the other work that we're doing in the community as well. I'll turn it back over to Stacy quickly.
So you've heard this again, and we're just going to keep sort of making a finer point on this, just because, you know, at the end of the day, these are charitable dollars that are your, you know, your donors and the community has entrusted you with to do your good work. And this sense of mission alignment when it comes to investment strategies is just becoming more and more compelling. It's a conversation that we're hearing that nonprofit boards are having with their donors. And so really just continuing to think about ECCF as, in some ways, a really consistent yet simple solution to making sure that those investment practices are aligned. As Jen said, we offer a simple conduit to those ESG investment practices. This sense that any fee that you're providing is not going to a large commercial institution, but going back to sustain a nonprofit organization committed to the same community that you are, and that there is this just general national, natural mission alignment. I'm certain that many of your donors are ECCF donors or have heard of us as an organization. Really bringing two trusted institutions together as a partnership can strengthen just that conversation that you're having on the board, as well as with your donors. And then, really there's nothing better than a third party endorsement. I'm not going to read this quote to you necessarily, but this is from the board president of Essex County Habitat for Humanity, who basically outlined this presentation for us in just 4 bullets, that ultimately the value that he saw here, and that the whole board and the community saw in partnering with ECCF. We've seen more nonprofits in Essex County coming to ECCF and joining us in this way. I think something about thinking about your financial sustainability after the pandemic, people are trying to build that just muscle in a different way, thinking about the future in a different way. And we're seeing that across the board in our sister community foundations as well. So, at the end of the day, our mission begins and ends with strengthening the nonprofit community. And if this is a way that we can offer that strength to you, we'd love to just continue the conversation. So with that whirlwind of a presentation, we will stop sharing our screens and go to any questions that you might have. And just to put a plug in, Britt Hutchins is here from ECCF. He's our CFO, and he loves super deep dive financial questions. So if you have them, don't feel shy. So any questions that you have, go ahead and unmute yourself and go for it.
Hey, Stacy, is there a minimum in terms of investments?
Yes, so a nonprofit fund at ECCF begins with a minimum balance of $25,000. And we ask that our nonprofit funds maintain that minimum balance while they have the fund here. Good question, Dave. Thank you. Anybody else?
We use an account at Fidelity right now to manage our endowment. And one of the nice things about it is it makes it an easy place for people who want to donate appreciated stock. You mentioned that you can facilitate gifts and things like that within this. Is there a way that our donors could send shares directly into a fund there?
It's a little bit of a sticky question, Bob. What we typically like to say is that for nonprofit organizations that are engaging with their donor community, right, we like to keep that nonprofit donor relationship at that level, meaning that donations of cash or security come directly into the nonprofit, and then the nonprofit determines whether or not, portions of those assets get put into the nonprofit fund for a different purpose. And the reason is really connected to donor intent and the integrity in maintaining that donor intent. So when a donor comes to you as a nonprofit organization and says, I'm going to give you this gift of securities and it's for general operating. It's for such and such a program. That relationship and that sort of commitment to that intention remains where it should be in this kind of scenario with the donor and the nonprofit directly. So we sort of remove ourselves from that sort of transactional element of it. However, we have facilitated larger gifts or one-time gifts, as Jen mentioned, complex assets. So if there's any donors who want to consider real estate, or, I will say we have also considered gifts of securities if the intention of those securities are to stay invested in that nonprofit fund. In other words, we don't want to become like an investment, like a brokerage firm, right? Where you're just getting securities and we're giving you the cash and getting securities and giving the cash. So I think like everything in philanthropy and fundraising, it's a little bit of it depends, but with a way that we sort of typically like to operate. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I think there's a couple of questions in the chat. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tammy.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask, can you talk about your compliance, audit procedures, things like that for a minute?
Sure. Britt, would you like to do that? I mean, I can, but it's probably better coming from you.
We go through a full audit every year. 990's on the thing. And we're also going through a federal audit because we did receive CDBG money as the foundation. So we have that. We have checks and balances on all trades, stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, we're pretty buttoned up that way.
No, that's good. Who's your audit firm?
Anstis.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I just see a couple quick questions in the chat. Does the nonprofit need to be headquartered in Essex County to participate? Absolutely not. The second question is, would our group, a nonprofit weekly newspaper, be eligible for participation? We do have an initial large gift and a growing group of fundraisers. I say, Francie, let's have a chat. If you are a 501c3, then we can always talk about it. That's really and I think that was a direct message anyway. So sorry about that, Francie, but we'll talk about that. That's it. As long as you are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, you're sort of hitting that minimum eligibility to have a conversation. Okay,
sorry. Can I pop in? Because I triggered something for me, which that we talk about, which is actually just by the nature of having a fund set up, we find that our nonprofit funds come back to us and say, it actually is very helpful from a fundraising perspective to go out and tell our donors, hey, we have set up this very specific structure and fund to, focus on growing this long-term, whether it's for a capital campaign or just an endowment, whatever it is, but having that structure and something called, the X, Y, and Z endowment fund at ECCF can actually be a benefit from a fundraising perspective.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
I have one that you might have already answered, but it's sort of a different one. If you are based in Essex County, but you're a performing arts organization mainly in Boston,
mm-hmm.
Is that an issue?
No, I mean, I think so. I'll start sort of at the top of a funnel and then I'll more specifically answer your question. So these types of funds, right, exist at community foundations other than just Essex County community foundations. Community foundations as a whole are really known for supporting a specific community that they're connected to, right? Be that geography or be it a particular constituent base. And so oftentimes you'll find nonprofits who just want to find a community foundation that's best connected to their organization. That might be because the executive director lives there. That might be because their donors are mostly based there. Like there's a number of different reasons, but like just technically, no, these assets, your organization could be really based anywhere and participate in a nonprofit fund here.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else? Don't be nervous. We're all nonprofit friends here. Brett, is there anything you missed or anything or we missed or anything you wanted to add? Anything?
No, I think you did a really good job. I mean, I don't think we want, any other questions you might have of portfolio components or anything like that. I mean, I think you guys hit it on it all.
Okay.
And I think maybe just quickly to talk process-wise, it's very simple to open one of these, and we will follow up with some information to everybody on this call, but it is simply, a quite simple fund agreement, and you make two main decisions, whether you want it to be a reserve fund or an endowed fund, and what you want the investment strategy to be. So which investment pool, and those authorized representatives, and then we open it up and, get your assets to work as quickly as possible.
I'm just going to drop Jen's contact info and my contact info in here as well. And Jen will follow up with some information. And then I think we have another question, just will your presentation be available to show our board? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at the beginning of this process, we'll share the video with you. You're more than welcome to share it with your board. We can share a copy of the slide deck as well. As we said at the beginning, this is it's a dialogue, right? Like that's really what we are speaking to here. So if any of this sounds interesting, or any of this is like, you're just even like, I don't know if it's the right fit, we can have a conversation about that. You can call Jen, you can call me, and have, just sort of start to kick around the idea. We work on your timing, right? So this isn't like nonprofit fund season where it needs to happen now, right? Oftentimes we've had folks come to something like this, and then a year later they're bored, it's on the docket. Please reach out, let us know. We do travel, we do presentations to finance committees quite a bit. So yeah, really just here as a resource to help along the journey.
Yeah, I would echo that, saying that we're happy to talk to members of your board. We can Zoom in. I just got to go in person to a board last week. It was great for the first time in a while. So, please view us again as the resource. Call us with questions. We are here to help.
Yep. Just to end, I would encourage you to look at the IFT page that we sent in the link, the Institute for Trustees. It's really phenomenal, and it's curated specifically for nonprofit executive directors and board leaders. So there just isn't anything like it. And it's virtual. So those, if you can't attend a session at a particular time, it's recorded and you have access to that, I think up to several months, which is awesome. And also just, clicking the link to go back into that investment management page, that's oftentimes where board members are going to start asking some questions. Dig around on the resources that we have there, and then, answer any questions that you have. As I mentioned in the chat, we update the performance reports monthly, but we have a slight lag, just, given our partnership as to where those performance reports come from. But we're expecting, I think January is likely any day now, would be my guess. As Britt smiles and nods and confirms. Okay, great. That sounds great. All right, last call for questions. Great. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you for the wonderful work you do in our community. And if anything, just please know that we're here to help. So send us a note, and we hope to speak with you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.